Alright, welcome back to the channel. Today we will be going over what I would say are the top 5 worst pet lizards. I will also be educating you on exactly why I believe that they are the worst pet lizards. But on top of that, I will also be giving you some alternative options for you guys to look into. And I'll also explain to you exactly why I believe that they are better options than the 5 which we will be going over today. So let's begin the video. Number 1, the Toko Gecko. Toko geckos are most certainly a beautiful species of gecko. However, their looks can be deceiving. Even though Toko geckos are very striking, unfortunately, they can be quite a handful. Toko geckos tend to be quite cantankerous and are also fast movers. Also, Toko geckos unfortunately are known for being quite bitey, and if you actually get bit by one, trust me, you're going to know all about it. Now, if you're looking to handle a Toko gecko, in all honesty, they're not really a gecko for handling. That being said, you will get the occasional one which is going to be fine with handling, but for the majority of them, they're more of a showpiece as opposed to something which you can get out and handle like I'm doing with this crested gecko. Now, I'm not saying that Toko geckos are awful and you should never keep them, because in my opinion, I actually really love these geckos. Please keep in mind that they are more of a showpiece as opposed to something which you can get out regularly and handle. And this is honestly just purely because they can be quite unpredictable. So instead, what I would recommend would be a Liana Gecko. Now, I recommend a Liana Gecko over a Toko Gecko because they are still a very large gecko. In fact, they're the largest gecko species on our planet that we are aware of. But in comparison to the Toko Gecko, the Liana Gecko is actually handleable. On top of that, they are a lot more docile, as well as a lot more tame. They are also nowhere near as fast as a Toko Gecko, so they're going to be a lot easier to catch if they get out. On top of that, their diet is also a lot simpler to a Toko Gecko. And most of all, you're less likely to get bit by a Liana Gecko than you would with a Toko Gecko. Now, I'm not saying that you won't get bit by a Liana Gecko. This still could happen, but the chances are a lot slimmer. I personally really love the Liana geckos. I love the colours and the patterns which they all have, and they are still a very striking gecko. And in my opinion, personally, I would say it's a lot more of a sensible decision to get a Liana gecko over a Toko gecko, especially if you're somewhat of a beginner. And in all honesty, as an owner, you're going to have a lot better of an experience keeping a Liana gecko than you would with a Toko gecko. So now let's move on to the next species. Number 2, Chinese water dragons. Now, most people will get a Chinese water dragon purely because they are one of the cheapest reptiles which you can buy. But unfortunately, this makes people fall into a trap because what they don't realize is how expensive their setup is, but also how expensive it actually is to maintain and upkeep. Chinese water dragons need an enclosure which has a lot of height, but also a lot of length and depth. On top of this, they also require a large water section, which is filtered and also heated, which first of all is an absolute pain in the arse to actually try and achieve, especially if you're a beginner. But also, in addition to that, it is also expensive to actually keep running and maintain the heated water. So unfortunately, a lot of Chinese water dragons eventually end up in places like rescues because people haven't actually done their research prior to buying the Chinese water dragon. And over time, they realize that they can't actually provide the correct care for them. On top of this, a lot of people are looking for a cheap reptile. And unfortunately, the Chinese water dragon isn't a cheap pet. On top of this, Chinese water dragons also come with a lot of dietary challenges. All of this being said though, if you are willing to spend out on the enclosure and have the funds available to maintain a Chinese water dragon setup, and providing everything is running smoothly, they are a wonderful species to keep. But you really do need to be willing to spend the money on the running costs monthly. So instead of a Chinese water dragon, what I'd recommend you look into would be something like a akis monitor lizard. Now, the reason why I would recommend an akis monitor over a Chinese water dragon is, first of all, they don't require as much space, especially height-wise, but also as a reptile, they are a lot smaller of a species, so they're a lot more of a manageable size. Akis monitors are a very curious and intelligent species, and generally they are wonderful reptiles to actually keep. On top of all of this, they generally are fairly docile and great with handling. So this is why personally I would recommend looking into an Akis over a Chinese water dragon. So let's move on to the next one. Lizard number 3. Crocodile monitors. Now, yes, these monitors certainly have beautiful colours and patterns to them, and they most certainly are impressive. However, there are several downsides to owning a Croc monitor. And in fact, what I'm about to say doesn't really just apply to Croc monitors. You could also technically say the same thing for the Asian water monitors and the Komodo dragons, as well as the Nile monitors. So the downside to owning all of those species which we've just mentioned is they are all extremely large. And in fact, large doesn't really cut it. They're flipping huge. So first of all, you're going to need an extremely large enclosure to actually accommodate for this species. And this in itself is going to come with a lot of temperature issues, heating problems, humidity problems, because you're trying to heat up such a large enclosure. But most importantly, and if I'm honest, this is the main reason why personally I wouldn't recommend getting something like a crocodile monitor, is because they are all extremely dangerous. They tend to have bad attitudes, aggressive temperaments, very unpredictable too. Not to even mention how expensive they really are to actually upkeep and maintain. That being said though, if you are mega rich, then yeah, I'm sure you're going to be able to provide everything that these lizards would need in order to thrive. On top of this, I'm not being funny, but if you get bit by one of these monitor lizards, their bites are going to be extremely detrimental to you, and I expect you'll end up in A&E. So in my opinion, personally, I would avoid them at all costs, just purely because of how bad their bites can be. So you might be asking yourself, well, what's the alternative option for those who are genuinely looking for a big lizard? So what I would personally recommend to you would be looking into something like a Argentine tegu instead. And if I'm being completely honest, there are so many reasons why, in my opinion, it would be more sensible to get something like a tegu over something like a crocodile monitor or even a Nile monitor, for example. So the main reason why I would personally recommend a tegu over them would be, first of all, they require nowhere near as much space as something like a crocodile monitor. Their enclosure's still going to be big, but nowhere near as big in comparison. But on top of this, tegus are 100 times more friendly. Tegus tend to be fairly docile, and it's not really in their nature to actually bite. In addition to that, they are smaller than something like a Komodo dragon or a crocodile monitor, so they're going to be a lot more of a manageable size. But also, they're actually handleable, whereas you're not going to be handling your crocodile monitor. Tegus also love human interaction, and they are extremely curious, highly intelligent species. But most of all, they're not unpredictable. They are basically known as being the dog of reptiles. And this is because of how docile they really are. So in my opinion, you'd be better off getting a tegu over something like a crocodile monitor or a Komodo dragon, because in my opinion, those species don't make great pets. But also with a tegu, you're actually going to be able to pick him up and give him a good cuddle without worrying that he's going to bite your head off. Which leads us on to the next species. Species number 4, Bosque Monitors. Bosque Monitors are a large species of lizard, so again you're going to need a large enclosure, which is also going to come with a lot of temperature problems as well as heating problems. On top of this, Bosque Monitors have a bit more complex care requirements and also tend to be fairly expensive to actually upkeep. On top of this, they also have a lot of dietary demands, which can be quite confusing for those who are new to the hobby. However, these aren't necessarily the reasons as to why I would say they're one of the worst pets. In all honesty, the real reason is because of how aggressive they can be. And on top of that, they usually come with a lot of handling complications and tend to be quite a handful. In order to tame a Bosque Monitor, you really need to be giving it lots of your time and attention. But most importantly, you really need to be consistent with handling. If you're not consistent, then unfortunately, this usually results in them becoming badly behaved. Eventually, this is what puts people off owning them and is partly the reason why Bosque Monitors end up going to rescues. Now, I will say that not all Bosque Monitors are going to be like this. You will find the odd one which will be quite calm and docile, but usually it's these ones which have been handled very well from a very young age. So unfortunately, the majority out there haven't been handled from such a young age, which is why, unfortunately, they tend to develop the defensive behaviour. So this is definitely something worth keeping in mind if you was actually considering getting a Bosque Monitor. So instead of a Bosque Monitor, you could also look into something like a Emerald Tree Monitor instead. Now, there are actually several different reasons why personally I'd recommend a Emerald Tree Monitor over a Bosque Monitor. So first of all, they are a lot smaller in size in comparison to an adult Bosque Monitor and therefore easier to manage. On top of that, they don't require as much space as a Bosque Monitor. That being said though, if you are going to provide a bigger enclosure, they will certainly make use of it, but their enclosure size compared to the Bosque Monitor isn't as big. On top of this, tree monitors tend to be fairly docile and quite friendly, but most importantly, they are very good when it comes down to taming. What's also great about the tree monitors is how extremely curious they are and how highly intelligent they are. And all round, compared to the Bosque Monitor, the tree monitor has a hell of a lot better temperament. Now, I do understand that obviously these tree monitors are a lot more expensive than a Bosque Monitor, but in my opinion, personally, I would say that you would be making a more sensible decision going for something like a tree monitor over a Bosque Monitor. The tree monitors are available in several different morphs, or colours should we say. You can get them in black, green, yellow and also blue. And in my opinion, all four of them are as stunning as one another. My personal favourites are the black and the blue. Let us know in the comments which colour of tree monitor you like the most. But in all honesty, you're going to find owning a tree monitor a lot less challenging than a Bosque Monitor. So it's definitely something worth looking into. So now let's move on to the final species. Lizard number 5, green iguanas. Green iguanas again require quite a large enclosure. And unfortunately, most people can't afford an enclosure this size. They are certainly not beginner friendly, and you certainly will need a lot of experience in order to actually provide the right care for them. Green iguanas tend to be quite a handful and cantankerous to actually manage. They too are also known for being quite aggressive, and it's likely that you may get bitten by it. Now, yes, they are stunning, I do agree with that, and they are most certainly a beautiful species of reptile, but personally, because of how unpredictable they are, this is why personally I would put them on the list of being one of the worst pet lizards. Again, if you are set on owning a large species of lizard, definitely look into a tegu or a tree monitor, but there is also something else which you could also consider looking into, which would be a Uram Mastic. The Uram Mastic makes an extremely great option for those who are looking for a herbivorous species. But on top of this, in comparison to the green iguana, the Uram Mastic is a much smaller species and is a lot more manageable. On top of that, you're actually going to be able to handle your Uram Mastic, whereas you're not really going to be able to handle your green iguana. In addition to this, Uram Mastic are a lot easier to actually care for and also require nowhere near as much space as something like a green iguana would. So if you're looking for a herbivorous species, then I'd certainly recommend looking into a Uram Mastic. But the most important reason why I would recommend a Uram Mastic over a green iguana is because Uram Mastics tend to be a lot more calmer and more docile. So this is certainly something worth keeping in mind. Personally, I really love the look of the Uram Mastics. I've never personally actually had an opportunity to own one yet, but I'm looking forward to the day when I actually do. So I'm sure I'll do a care video on them in the near future. But last of all, with a Uram Mastics, you're not going to be concerned about it ripping your arm off. So that's our top 5 worst pet lizards. Let us know what you thought about this video in the comments below. Now, if you actually own one of these species, which we've gone over today, definitely drop your experiences into the comment section below. Also, let us know in the comments if you're enjoying these top 5 videos, because I can certainly do a lot more of them. But that's it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to drop us a like to let us know that you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy this video, maybe consider subscribing to the channel. By subscribing, not only do you join our community filled with reptile enthusiasts like yourself, but also you play a huge part in my channel growing, which is going to allow me to be able to make you a lot more content going forward. That's it for today's video, guys. And yeah, I suppose I shall see you in my next video. See ya!